both red and black for various planeswalkers.
Now on the left is number 8 on our Season 3 leaderboard. That is Kent Ketter. He is playing Red White Devotion, more of a standard enthusiast than Legacy. But let's talk about Kent for a little bit here. Red White Devotion is a deck he's been playing for a little while off and on. He's always casting Stormbreath Dragons. We know that. 9th place in both Invitationals this year. So he's had a lot of success at these tournaments. Now, early in the year is when Kent made a name for himself during Season 1. He, started off really, really well at the Open Series in Indianapolis before flaming out. And then in Columbus, he lost in the finals with Red White Devotion.
And no signature wins on the Open Series, but had an incredible start to Season 1, as you mentioned. A lot of top 8 finishes.
He's really good at getting second.
Yes.
It's like his specialty, as Duke does have an Elvish Mystic to begin round number 5, the first round of our standard coverage. And Eidolon of the Great Revel is what Ketter has on turn number 2. Oddly enough, both these players are playing really fringe decks.
I'm surprised that we haven't seen a bit more of a resurgence of Red Devotion. In my mind, it's a very, very solid deck against the red beatdown decks that have become a lot more prevalent after Tom Ross's Invitational win and then the noise he made with Rebel Red very recently. An interesting feature of Kent's deck here, 2 copies of Legion's Initiative in the list.
A Nykthos, and now a Sylvan Caryatid. Duke will have to take 2, of course, because Eidolon is in play, but he's doing what his deck is supposed to do, which is ramping on up.
The concern for Reid in this matchup here is, and maybe he doesn't know what Kent's up to yet because Kent actually has a mono-red aggro start thus far, is if Kent's able to get to overloaded Mizium Mortars before Reid is able to do anything of substance.
Ketter does attack, Reid with a pretty quick block with a Caryatid, and now a Boros Reckoner. Now, you want to talk about a card we haven't seen for a while.
And this card is a complete and utter beating against red beatdown lists.
Yeah.
And aggressive decks of all stripes, not just red, but white aggro and black aggro as well. It's not even really that bad against decks like Green Devotion. The board builds up, and it's still something that can attack and block profitably.
And it'll do a nice job providing the Devotion. Didn't expect to see, Nykthos Mania here, but that's where we're at. Now Duke will have to take 2, and he'll reveal a Stomping Ground. And we are being informed that the Duke did start on 6 cards this game. But I'm doing that mulligan pretty well. Of course, you're going to give him a land, going to reveal Nylea. And I imagine both players actually know what the other is up to now.
Well, Kent's start is still a little bit concealed here. I mean, this could just be a red beatdown list thus far.
Kind of a unique take on things.
Correct. But the Nykthos, if Kent plays it, that will reveal what's actually going on here.
The jig? The jig is up.
It is up.
Neither of us are looking to play anything close to fair magic. Here's a Stormbreath Dragon. What a surprise from Kent Ketter. And he's coming on in.
He sets up however he wants to set up, but the top of the curve is always going to be Stormbreath.
It's always Dragon, yeah. That's how he's always kind of rocking things. So there is your 4/4 flyer. Ketter actually wrote an article on the Select Side of Star City Games this week that was basically like, look, I'm playing Stormbreath Dragon. I will find the best shelf for it. And he did actually make this deck list relatively public of like, this is what I'm doing, and I think this is well positioned, and hopefully I'm able to win with this. He's off to a great start, but we started with Legacy. And it looks like this might be a pretty good matchup for him.
He likes his Delvers in Legacy, and he likes his Stormbreath Dragons in the Standard. I think this matchup's pretty solid for Kent. If he had more copies of Mizium Mortars, I think it would be a lock. He only is playing 2 in the main deck. And that's a card that's very challenging for Green Devotion decks to beat when Kent's able to get to it ahead of schedule through Nykthos and building up his board.
So the question here is who can go over the top better with all that mana that Nykthos does generate. Right now, it looks like Ketter, but Duke does have the ability to generate a lot of mana this turn. His Nykthos is going to tap for 4. You throw a Caryatid, and that was Mystic in there. He also hasn't played a land yet this turn. He's capable of some crazy things too.
But Reid really doesn't have an answer to the air. I mean, he can set up something like Pelucranos and a Domri, for example. He's got 2 copies of Arbor Colossus, if he can find that, though no copies of Court of Calling in this list. So he's a little susceptible to just getting killed by flyers, the way his deck is set up.
Reid going to generate some mana here. That's a Xenagos. Of course, that can provide even more mana with the plus. That elevator is going up to generate 3 mana. There's a Domri. So he's got his Planeswalkers online. Gonna fight the Eidolon.
Yeah, and it looks like Kent may have missed I guess Reid is saying that's okay. You can get the trigger there. But look there, momentarily as though Kent may have missed the Eidolon trigger on the Domri.
And now here comes the courser into the red zone. And what's the scary thing here is, Reid's next turn is probably the scary one, right? Well, that's where everything gets crazy.
That assumes Reid does get to a next turn.
That's the big question. Ketter will draw a card. He will deploy Battlefield Forge. And he's going to go monstrous with this, and Duke is going to pack it up and pack it in. Kent Ketter does win game number 1 here over Reid Duke. Red-White Devotion up a game over Green-Red Devotion. We turn our attention to the sideboard, and I've got the Dukes in front of me. He's going to be looking at 4 copies of Nylea's Disciple, 3 Mist Cutter Hydra, 2 Mizium Mortars, 2 Chandra Pyromaster, a Scavenging Ooze, a Bow of Nylea, a Cetessan Tactics, and a card that I think is going to join us immediately in Hornet Queen.
I think Hornet Queen's pretty solid for this matchup, though it is rough for Reid to try to accelerate into a threat that gets caught up by Mizium Mortars, because that's the card he's trying to fight over the whole time anyway. I think the 2 copies of Cetessan, or the copy of Cetessan Tactics and the 2 Mizium Mortars are reasonable for Reid to bring in. He has to do work suppressing Kent's board. Once Kent gets a solid base in play, any of his Nykthos payouts, be it Mizium Mortars, be it a big Perforos, Reid really can't contend with that. He's got to preempt Kent from getting to that spot, because once Kent has everything set up, there's not a lot Reid can do.
On Ketter's side, what do you see?
A Mizium Mortars, 2 Deicides, 2 Chandra Pyromasters, 3 Chain of the Rocks, 3 Boros Charms, and 4 Fire Drink Crusaders. Much of the same logic applies for Kent's sideboarding here. He wants to keep Reid's initial board contained and be the first one to do something explosive with Nykthos. So to that end, I think the extra copy of Mizium Mortars, which can come in as an early game removal spell or as a Nykthos payout, that will come in. 3 copies of Chain of the Rocks as well. Just an easy answer to either Reid's early mana creatures or some large creature like Pelucranos or Arbor Colossus that gets played down the line.
Both players going to finish sideboarding up here, but since we do have some standard action, we might as well talk about some standard things going on in Star City Games, and that is a game night that does begin next week. How is it September already? I don't understand.
Occurred so fast, but you can see on the promo here, it's available at all participating stores. 2 pins and 8 foil tokens each week, with new pins and foils released each month. Every Wednesday night. You've already missed the cutoff for getting this set up in your store on this month. August 11th was the cutoff. If you're looking to get on board in October, make sure to do that soon. StarCityGames.com/game night for more information. This is supposed to be a little bit more casual focused, more local organized play. Stores have a lot of discretion and flexibility to run the formats that they want to run, sanction it or not sanction it as they so choose. Just about getting more foot traffic into your store, more people playing at the local level. So again, you want to get this program up and running. If you want to get started in October, StarCityGames.com/game night for more information. And this is a worldwide program, so don't worry about if you're in Europe, if you're somewhere in Asia, Latin America, what have you. We can get these kits over to you, so sign up now.
Looking forward to it beginning next week as we do turn our attention back here to the Duke and Kent Ketter. I do think that things are pretty good for Kent here, but I also think that it's very important for each of the players to actually draw their copy of Nykthos, excuse me, since it takes their deck from 0 to 60.
It is the big payout here. Now, Reid can cobble together something pretty powerful by just mana creatures into a big creature. Without Nykthos, his deck is more likely to function than Kent's. But I believe when both people have Nykthos, Kent's deck is so much more powerful, mostly because of Mizium Mortars.
Yeah, now, of course, Reid does have a couple copies of Mizium Mortars in his sideboard, but it's not as good on his side, I feel.
He can hypothetically get to an overloaded Mortars. That is something his deck is capable of doing. I do not believe he has Burning Tree Emissary in his list.
You will not find any of those this week, and he does have, again, as far as the cards that can produce red mana, Sylvan Caryatid, Voyaging Satyr, untapping one of the 4 Stomping Grounds, 4 Temple of Abandonance, or Temple of Malice. He also has Xenagos to provide some red mana.
It's a challenge for him to overload a Mortars, but it's not impossible.
Well, the one thing we know he can do is generate a lot of mana to work his way towards Arbor Colossus, maybe the monstrosity on that. Multiple Nylea God of the Hunt activations, large activations of Pelucranos, and those 4 copies of Genesis Hydra.
I really like the absence of Burning Tree Emissary in this list. What I like about Reid's list is he can play a normal game even if the mana creatures get picked apart early or he doesn't find Nykthos. He can just play a normal acceleration into a big card sort of setup. When you have Burning Tree Emissary in your deck, your draws get really polarized. Your excellent draws go through the roof, but it does magnify your poor draws. So Reid stabilizing the deck a little bit with cards like Xenagos and Domri, so he can play more of a normal game.
Elvish Mystic will begin things for Duke in game number 2. A Mountain and just a passing of the turn there for Ketter. Not much of a surprise. This deck doesn't have a ton to do on the first turn of the game.
Pretty much nothing. He has a couple copies of Chain of the Rocks.
Yeah. Sometimes you will find, you know, a card like Shock kind of looming through the deck list. He does have Fire Drinker, Satyr in his sideboard, but those are likely not in the deck right now.
That's for converting into more of an aggro game against control decks. I would be stunned if Kent had one of those in his deck's post-board here.
Duke will play a Temple of Abandon. It is time to scry here for Reid. Top card will go to the bottom of Voyaging Satyr. And then a passing of the turn over to Ketter. And you can see his hand. He does play a Mountain. And he looks like he's choosing between Frostborn Weird or Eidolon of the Great Revel.
I feel like the ship may have sailed here a bit on Eidolon. And Ken's hand is full of cheap stuff of his own. He has an additional Eidolon, a Chain of the Rocks, and so forth. I think I would lead out with the Weird, which is what Kent's doing, because the Eidolon's way more likely to be a hindrance to Kent than to Reid at this stage.
So the 1/4 does join the party, as we do go back Reid's way for turn number 3. It looks like Reid may have found a copy of Nykthos, but he will start off with a Courser. So take a look. That's just a test in tactics that now Ketter will have to play around.
And Reid has one on his board, and I mentioned before that I liked it in the matchup, thought he would bring in, and it's here. And just anything that can contain Kent's board is valuable for Reid in the matchup.
Reid does deploy a Nykthos, activates the Voyaging Satyr on tap of land to deploy another Satyr before passing the turn back, and it feels like next turn's the big one. That's where Reid's going to have all that mana.
But will he have anything of significance to do with it? The success in tactics is a starting point, but Kent can play around it by just kind of saying go from this position, assuming Reid has no big payout.
Ketter going to serve across here. And Reid elects not to block. And now there is an Eidolon and a passing of the turn. So Duke will draw his copy of Success in Tactics. And one of the best players in the world will figure out how to use it.
I'm not sure I like adding the Eidolon to the board here in the face of the Success in Tactics. It is something that just gets swept up. It also now gives Reid the option of making both of his Voyaging Satyrs 2/3s and shooting down the Weird if he'd rather do that instead.
I think, you know, Kent's maybe thought process is I need to kind of get past this point anyway, so here is Tactics. And he can clear the entire board.
Yeah, he can trade the Elvish Mystic with the Eidolon, or he can break it up however he wants to, but he can keep his 2 Voyaging Satyrs and trade the elf for the other creature. Yep. Or no, this is actually, you can actually do it like this where he keeps everything.
Yeah, it's 2 toughness. Yeah, he loses nothing.
Yeah.
But I think Kent might be okay saying, okay, like that's your exchange. He presents like a perfect situation for Reid. Loses his stuff and he says, okay, I needed to get past that point anyway. Now it's time to rebuild.
I just don't know if there was much of a rush to do it. I think Kent maybe could have just said go there for a little bit.
Eidolon number 2 will be deployed there by Ketter. So now Duke will have to see if he can put something together here. He's got another land to play. The problem here is, does he have a payoff card? That works. That's a payoff card.
It's not quite Garrick, let's say, but it is a bit of a payoff.
However, Ketter, with a timely draw himself, picked up another copy of Chain of the Rocks. He will take 1 and deploy that. Now, he will have to take 2 from his Eidolon as well to do so. It looks like Reid will generate a little bit of mana here to try to get this, maybe get this Eidolon off the table via Pelucranos.
Yeah, he has enough mana here to successfully fight the Eidolon off the table.
Ketter's last 2 cards, he has a Fanatic. He also has a Stormbreath Dragon. So there is the Fanatic, and it'll just be for a rather boring 1. But it does get on the table, and now pass the turn back.
And a 4/2 is not shabby here. It does force a double block out of Reid at the worst.
There's Temple of Abandon there for Duke. Top card will maybe go to the bottom. He's going to consult things here. He does not know Ketter's last card, but if you know Kent, I think we all know what his last card is.
It's likely to be Stormbreath Dragon.
Ketter's draw for the turn was a Nykthos. And there's the 5 mana. It's his namesake. There is the dragon. It's time to get into the red zone here. It's an attack for 8, and we'll see if Duke has any interest in maybe the double block or not. Also makes you wonder what that card on top of his deck is.
He would have to have a huge draw here. If it's Mizium Mortars, then I can see not blocking, because he can, with the Voyaging Satyrs, generate triple red and overloaded mortars.
Ketter will untap. There's an Arbor Colossus, excuse me.
Also not bad here, to say the least.
And he can activate Monstrosity right now because that thing provides enough devotion. So you wonder what he kept on top. Now you figured it out. There's an attack for 1. He's got a 9/9 out there.
And these Nykthos mirror matches can swing back and forth so fast.
I'd say that things have changed. Just a touch.
A little bit.
Duke will draw a card now. Sitting at 9 life, but he's got a 9/9 on the table with reach. A couple of creatures out there to maybe chump block. And Ketter's already cashed in 2 of his Chain of the Rocks. Now Reid's activating Nykthos again, it looks like.
This is not a good sign if you're Kent.
No. I would be horrified. Oh, God. Duke with all that mana.
So each of those activations is for, it's 6 mana, and so it's +4 each time. So 6, 10, 14, 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, it's a big Hydra.
I think that's 17 mana that got spent on that, if I'm not mistaken. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Excuse me, 15.
Well, Reid's going to figure out what the best card is. That's what he's going to do. So that's 15 on that old Genesis Hydra. And we'll see what card Reid wants here. He's got a bevy of options. None of which, oddly enough, are Nylea, God of the Hunt. That's maybe the one card he wanted to find that he didn't.
And now the moment for Mizium Mortars to be a big draw for Kent. That has passed us by.
Has that window closed? Is that no longer a thing anymore? Mizium Mortar is a mighty powerful card, but not going to get him out of this one. And so Reid with a grip full of cards in his hand. One of these cards will be free. I think he's deciding right now probably between Pelucranos, how that affects things. Do I get a Domri and maybe fight something to force through damage? Perhaps I get an Arbor Colossus so that I have a reach blocker so I don't lose to something like running Stormbreath Dragons. But he will go with the World Eater. He will put those cards away. You do shuffle with Genesis Hydra. It's not like Cascade. And you know what? Why not a 15-15?
Sure.
That's a fine way to start off game 2.
Good Mizium Mortars protection. And almost as an afterthought, now Reid gets to attack with his 9/9.
Oh, how lucky. Oh, Kent doesn't want to play anymore. That's strange. Reid Duke
you win fine.
Reid Duke does win game number 2 here over Kent Ketter. Green-Red Devotion ties it up against Red-White Devotion.
This is an issue in the matchup for Kent. His hands that are just, when there's nothing big going on, nothing of substance, the game goes on for a really long time, and Reid with his 4 copies of Genesis Hydra probably has more big draws in the deck than Kent does.
I imagine that's the case. Both players are going to go back to the drawing board here. Not sure how much is going to change, even though Ketter does get to play first, so we'll see who's more explosive out of the gate. Reid can certainly keep up with the mana, though.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really, really big deal in this instance.
Oh, Reid's got a huge mana advantage. Kent can go over the top. You know, Stormbreath Dragon, sometimes Reid can't answer it. There will also be times where Kent gets to a fast Mizium Mortars and Reid can't recover. But if both players are kind of allowed to just do their thing, I think Reid's got a bit of an edge.
Well, a couple weeks down the road, we're not going to have 1. We're going to have 2 opens. My feet are going to be up somewhere because I have this weekend off, but you get to work.
Yeah, here in New Jersey. What am I complaining about? Originally on the schedule just for Indianapolis, we decided to give a dual Open Series weekend a shot. The coverage has moved to New Jersey, where I will be covering the event with Matthias Hunt. And hopefully this goes well. Not a whole lot to be said about it.
Should be a lot of fun.
Indianapolis is still going to be a same Open Series weekend with a Standard Open Saturday, Legacy Open Sunday, the Modern Premier IQ 5K as well on Sunday, but the coverage will be in New Jersey.
Consultark here. It's the first weekend for that.
A big tournament.
Yeah. Players are going to get to make their mark on the weekend. Should be a lot of fun. 2 opens to draw results from and see what kind of innovations are going to be out there. you know, this is the most fun time of Magic, right? This is Christmas time. We have a set rotating out, and I had a lot of fun with Return to Ravnica, and now we have a set rotating in, and I have no idea what to expect.
It's going to be a whole new world. I mean, no Mutabolts, no Sphinx of Revelation, no Abrupt Decay. A lot of defining cards of Standard. They're not going to be around.
I'm looking forward to that weekend. Again, 2 opens to draw from. You'll be in Edison with Matthias Hunt. I will probably be in Seattle somewhere watching that tournament take place, but my feet will be up.
It'll be really exciting. I mean, new Standard formats are really fun to watch.
That weekend, when that weekend is probably the most fun weekend of Magic, right? That's when everything gets unveiled. You get to see people brew. Everything's viable, right? You can try anything. Who knows what's good?
And I mean, one of the first, you know, to go back a couple of years, Kessig Wolf Run off of Primeval Titan was something that essentially debuted the initial week, if memory serves, in one of the Open Series.
Yeah, I imagine at that tournament that, I can't remember the name of that player. I imagine multiple times when he was playing Primeval Titan getting Kessig Wolf Run and Inkmoth Nexus, he was probably mocked momentarily and then activated the Nexus and killed his opponent.
Yeah, you get to laugh for one turn because the following turn, he's killing you.
Yes.
So you get one turn of laughter.
So it's always fun to watch players come up with innovative ways to do things. You know, last year at Pro Tour Dublin, we saw Mono Blue Devotion, Green Red Devotion decks. All these decks do really, really well. Mono Blue Devotion win the tournament. Then, you know, just some guy playing 2 Pack Rats in his Mono Black deck.
And the mana is probably going to be pretty solid week 1, too. If Concentrac here is shaping up the way that it looks like, there's probably going to be a healthy amount of mana fixing because it's a wedge set. You put that alongside the reprint of the Apocalypse, Pain Lance, and M15. You still have all the temples from Theros block, Mana Confluence. I think it's going to be anything goes week 1.
You can do your thing.
Just do whatever you want.
Ketter going to mulligan very, very quickly. We'll see if Duke will do the same. And it looks like Duke is happy enough with his hand.
It's interesting because it doesn't seem that Reid, by the looks of it, really ever cuts his hair. But his hair also doesn't really grow any longer. It's always the same length at every Magic tournament.
He could be very meticulous about it. Have you considered that? Maybe he cuts it on the daily.
Perhaps.
I don't know what the man does with his time, outside of being very good at Magic.
I imagine that Sugarloaf, New York is some sort of a land that time has forgotten. Like you exist in some sort of stasis when you live there. And things like your hair growing longer or shorter just doesn't occur.
Somehow it is never longer, though. It's always the same length. It's very strange. Ketter down to 5. 2 very, very quick mulligans.
Reid offered a brief sorry as Kent mulligan 5, and unlike most human beings on Earth, I believe Reid meant it.
Yes, I do too. I think that was
he legitimately feels sympathy for Kent having to mulligan right now.
I actually want to play a good 3rd game.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, Reid doesn't really have much in the way of removal. He's got a couple mortars and the assassin tactics that we saw. So Kent can definitely mulligan to a 5-card hand that can beat a good 7 out of Reid. This is not impossible.
Yep. It is not over.
You know, if Reid was playing some sort of Thoughtseize spot removal deck, for Red Devotion, a mulligan to 5 is catastrophic. But in this matchup, it's possible Kent can win.
Ketter going to rub his hands together, hope for a good 5. He says, all right, good enough for me. We're underway in game number 3. A mountain there for Ketter. Does Duke have maybe an Elvish Mystics to start things off again? We will see. And he does. Ketter on his 2nd turn. Draw. Looks like he drew a Frostmourner for the turn. There's that. Step in the right direction.
Yep, he has a Chain of the Rocks. He has a Boros Reckoner. This is a hand with some upside.
Yep. He can play Magic. That's all I can ask for.
I mean, if he finds, say, a Battlefield Forge or a Sacred Foundry.
Slow rolled himself a little bit on the draw. It's a copy of Burning Tree Emissary. He will deploy that, activate here, come across for 2. Duke will not block, so he goes down to 18. We'll see what Reid can do on his 3rd turn of the game. That will probably slow things down for Ketter. An Arbor Colossus. Ketter draws his card. It's one of his favorites in Mizium Mortars, but not great right now.
He can hang tight for a little bit. He really needs to find a white source of mana. Then he can Chain the Rock this play. It looks like he's going to offer up a trade here with that Mizium Mortars.
I'd be okay with that. See if Reid can kind of suss this out.
Well, this is not a hard blot to sniff out if he's attacking with that, but not the weird.
And Reid says, that's fine. I will take 2 down to 16.
It does signal loud and clear that that card is in Kent's hand because this is not a spot where bluffing 2 points of damage means a lot to Kent.
There is a forest for Duke. Colossus will come across for 6. Ketter goes down to 14, maybe. Be surprised if he blocked, and he doesn't. What's the follow-up here? It's a Genesis Hydra. X is 4, 2, 3, and 4. You see a Courser, a Sylvan Caryatid, a Nykthos, and a copy of Mizium Mortars. Courser will come into play. Duke will shuffle his deck here, and we will see the top of his deck in just a moment.
So the signal is now out loud and clear to Reid that Kent has a Mizium Mortars in hand. That does not matter very much at this point, though if Kent draws a copy of Nykthos, then suddenly it may matter quite a bit.
Kent's best draw here might be Battlefield Forge. Temple of Triumph is pretty close. He will play that. Take a look. Leaves his card on top.
And the tough spot here is Kent's almost compelled to use the Mizium Mortars on the Genesis Hydra.
Yeah.
He just can't. I know that he would like to get to an overloaded spot, but he's so far behind, I don't think he can afford to take that hit, especially since that Arbor Colossus is going to go unchecked.
And the problem here is that Arbor Colossus is going to have a trample in just a moment as well, if Duke would like it to, due to Nylea.
I mean, there's the faintest glimmer of hope if you're in Kent's seat right now, because the Chain Rock's in hand.
Let's see what this is going to be. Another Genesis Hydra.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Forget I said anything.
That'll be for 4. Domri is a pretty good choice. That's going to come into play. The Hydra, again, will be for 4. Kent's probably wondering, do I get to see that top card?
We've seen people dabble with some copies of Genesis Hydra in their Green Devotion list. I think this may be the first time I've seen 4.
This is the most impressed I've been by the card as well.
Well, Reid's list, again, I think the absence of Burning Tree Emissary and the fact that he's just trying to play, he doesn't have to actually go off with Nykthos to win the game. He can just accelerate into good 5 and 6 mana creatures. Genesis Hydra plays a dual role there. It's a fine thing to be playing for 6 mana, and if he finds a Nykthos, then it's something to go bananas with.
So the Hydra comes in and brings a Domri along with it. We'll see how Duke wants to use the Domri after he sees the top of his deck. It's Voyaging Satyr. Might be time for some fighting.
Just needs to keep Kent's board contained. He's got all the cards in play that he needs right now. Doesn't need to plus this Domri to get any more. Close the game out as quickly as possible and prevent Kent from doing anything crazy with a theoretical Nykthos off the top. That's all Reid's playing for right now.
Duke is considering attacking with the Courser, but I think he'd rather have his Domri in play for future turns in case the game goes that way. There's a Temple. Duke will gain a life with the top card to the bottom. Elvish Mystic is what he'll see for his next turn. Maybe we'll just pass the turn back over to Ketter, who's still stuck with that Boros Reckoner and Chain of the Rocks in his hand, but he can cast one of those next turn. In a perfect world, he'll be able to cast both. He drew a copy of Battlefield Forge.
Again, this is just enough to keep playing, you know?
It's going to take a sequence of draws for Kent to get back into this one, but at least he can keep playing moving forward.
Well, the Boros Reckoner does a pretty good job. You know, that if you assume that this Chain of the Rocks is going to take care of Arbor Colossus, Boros Reckoner does a pretty good job of keeping Reid's team at bay. I mean, Genesis Hydra can attack, but that's a trade. And then from there, Kent may be drawing reasonably live.
Well, there's a Pelucranos. That elevator goes up very quickly, so that's going to get added to the grip. That's a forest. That'll come into play. Look at Courser go as Duke gains a life.
Yeah, Courser Domri, obviously a nice little synergy.
Again, Duke with a copy of Pelucranos in the grip. We also know he has an Nylea, God of the Hunt, hanging out there as well. So there's 4 mana. And there is the 6/6 that gives everybody but itself trample. Makes these blocks a little bit worse for Ketter.
And even if Reid has to make a slightly ugly trade with this Boros Reckoner, that's fine for him. He's got still more than enough resources to work with. He doesn't have to worry about getting burned out in this spot.
And of course, the tough part is that he has enough mana for an activation to give something +2/+2.
Yeah.
So None of the blocks looking all that great, and Trample does kind of one-up Boros Reckoner a little bit.
It does do some help, yeah. And it's very likely, no matter what happens, that Reid's going to be able to keep Devotion in the next turn, where Nylea can also attack.
So as Ketter tries to figure out the optimal blocks, he's going to put that in front of the Genesis Hydra. Duke says, I will deal some damage over to you. Trample over for 1. Reckoner's trigger. Put it over to this. That will die. But Reid has something to play after combat in Pelugrinos. Ketter will draw. Play a Temple. Take a look at the top card. Has a Perforos as his last card. We'll cast that and extend the hand. Reid Duke is going to get the job done here over Ketter. 2 games to 1. Green-Red Devotion will take down Red-White Devotion in a battle of the Nykthos Mirror.
Ken had a lot of the cards in his deck post-board, and I'm not saying that he could have sideboarded different necessarily, but he did have a lot of Fanatic Amogus, Perforos, Eidolon, these cards that aren't really going to be doing a whole lot unless Kent's board completely goes off. Reid had a much more stable build post-board, even though Kent's Mulligan to 5 was very bad for him. Reid didn't have to go off with Nykthos to do powerful things, and it's a very impressive element of his deck that I haven't really seen out of Green Devotion. Usually the deck is Nykthos or bust, and Reid's list can function just fine without it.
Perhaps a conversation with him in the sideboard later today.
I think we should get the Reid in there.
Maybe the Duke. Get him into the
sideboard.
sideboard.
Chat about his list a little bit. There's some cool stuff going on here.
He is 5-0. Congratulations to him with Green-Red Devotion. A deck, truthfully, as I said, I did not expect to see him play.